I'd like to begin my talk not with a personal anecdote or anything that might be considered very heavy immediately, but instead, I want to cover a couple of ground components. So, how many know what the word altruism means? All right, I've got a few hands. Let's cover that, and then I'll get into my talk. All right. So, altruism is essentially the fancy word that behavioral scientists and psychologists like to give doing charitable acts. So that's things that you do without anything in exchange. For example, a beggar comes up to your car window, you give them 5 lei, that's an act of altruism or a charitable act. Now, with that covered, I would like to talk a little bit about the fact that people, understandably enough, like to view themselves as charitable. It's a nice concept to say, hey, yes, I give to those in need. However, there is an extremely small number of people who actually act upon this promise of charitability. And it's mostly because they don't see that doing something for somebody also gives you something in exchange. People don't see the balance of altruism. And to illustrate this a little bit further, I like to do a quick thought experiment with everyone, all right? So I want everyone to imagine that they are back in middle school, let's say, and you have an exam in roughly 2-3 days for math. One of your classmates comes up to you after class and asks you, hey buddy, could you spend all of tomorrow evening helping me study for math? Now, unbeknownst to your friend here, you aren't very well off either. Again, this is a hypothetical, but still. Many people would, understandably enough, like to say conceptually, yeah, it's a nice thought. I'd like to help my friend, sort of do better in class. But realistically, the number of people who would actually act upon that promise is marginal. Most people would work on themselves because they need that extra evening. And fair enough, I see the point. It's a valid argument. However, there is a bit more nuance here. And a really important problem with altruism nowadays that I really need to cover. Now, thanks to the internet, we are as connected as we have ever been as a society. But in the same time, we have never been more divided, siloed, and self-centered ever in human history. Even in the Mesozoic era, when the telegraph didn't exist. We've never been more separated as a result of better communication. But people, despite this, still don't find the reason, with all of these resources around them, to actually help others. And this is mostly because people see altruism as a one-way transaction. I give you something for nothing in exchange. Why would I help somebody if I don't get anything myself? And fair enough. But there's nuance. You need to be able to look for what you're getting in exchange. And again, to illustrate that, now I will be going into doing a little bit of a personal anecdote. So at the beginning of 6th grade, I had a math exam coming up in 2-3 days. At the end of class, one of my classmates comes up to me and says, hey buddy, can you help me study for math? Now, you may see that this is a very similar setup to earlier. I was not a great student in 6th grade. I was a 4 out of 8 student, which on an A grade would be a C. So on the lower hand of decent. And even then, for math, my last test had come back a 3 out of 8. That's the equivalent of a D on A grade. I was a bad student. Bottom of the barrel. However, I was also very proud. And because of that, I told my friend, sure, I'll help you. And then I got home, and I have never studied harder in my life for anything. Even recently, I had my first semester exams in 11th grade. I'm a DP1 student now. And even then, I didn't study as hard as I did that one night from 3:30 to 10 o'clock when I went to bed all I studied was really basic quadratics, 6th grade math. But everything I learned was incredibly superficial. I barely understood anything of what I was reading. If you asked me to tell you what I learned then right now, I wouldn't be able to. But regardless, next day comes, I go to my friend's house, and so begins the clunkiest tutoring session the world has ever seen. I didn't know what I was talking about. My friend was lost in the first place, as was previously established. But regardless, we got through it, and then test day came. We did our test. A week later, grades come back. I get a 6. He gets a 5. Pause. My friend was a 4 or 5 student, and he got a 5. All right, understand. I went from a 3 to a 6 in 3 days. What happened? Did I, when I went back home, study more? Absolutely not. I had accepted my fate. I thought, you know what? I'm going to get another 3 or 4. It's early 6th grade. Who cares? But what had actually ended up happening is while I was teaching my friend, you drop these little tidbits of information throughout. And they filled in some like really, really substantial holes in my understanding. But that's not the point I'm trying to make here. I'm not saying do altruism because it helps you learn stuff. What I want to get to is that by doing altruism, you learn things you wouldn't be able to otherwise, like community service. If you go out and do a little bit of community service, you would be surprised how much you yourself get out of it. Say you help the elderly, as is shown here. Well, you now know how to talk to people in vulnerable situations. You know how to help people physically. If you want to help at a hospice center, for example, you know how to talk to children better. You know how to cater conversation. If you want to tutor people, like I previously mentioned, you will learn how to teach. You will learn how to cater to very specific people. And it's these sort of skills that you get through altruism that you can't otherwise. You can't learn these skills without putting yourself out there for nothing in exchange. And not to mention the incredible benefits to mental health, right? I mean, there's many sources, for example, off the top of my head, there's Western Connecticut University and ResearchGate, which are 2 of the foremost leading institutions regarding mental health and volunteerism, and they've, at least until now, drawn an extremely strong trend between an increased rate of volunteerism and a positive self-image. But this might sort of seem to some as a very selfish way to look at altruism. It's like helping other people purely to help yourself. It's not a great concept, right? It's very selfish inherently. But selfish is not bad. Selfish is when you do something for yourself with yourself as the #1 priority. However, if I am helping an elderly person and I just so happen to gain an increased skill set as a result of me really, really paying attention to what I'm saying, is it really on me that what's the harm, right? The point I'm trying to get to is what's the harm? But at the end of the day, when all is said and done, you get down to one core. And that's that by doing altruistic acts and really looking carefully at what you're doing, thinking introspectively into what am I saying, what am I doing, what am I learning from this, you will come out a better person. And when you go home tonight after this TED Talk, I don't necessarily want you to agree with me, but I do want you to see eye to eye with me when I say that helping people is the most selfish way to be selfless. I've been Radu Tatar. Thanks so much for your attention.